Thanks. So thank you, Liz, and thanks for the invitation to come up here. I think as you read all those titles, I realize why I'm so confused. So this is the topic of my talk today. Can we design our way out of the obesity epidemic? And I'm really glad to be here because it was in the process of trying to develop a behavioral intervention for obesity that I realized that the expertise that you folks have is something I really needed on my team. I can't claim to understand what you do, but I have tremendous admiration for it. So what I'm going to try to do in this talk is to first give a little bit of an overview of the public health problem of obesity, the scale of it, scope of it. Talk about how I became interested in whether technology is something that could help us provide a solution to this problem. And then give you a case study of some of our experience trying to develop a technology-supported intervention for obesity treatment. And then I'm going to invite your ideas and your collaboration because we sure need it. So obesity, as you probably know, it's a huge problem. In the US, currently 2/3 of us are either overweight or obese. Just a very, very large number. Around the world, that's 300 million people who are obese, 1 billion if we include both overweight and obesity. So it's a massive problem, and we're about to see some of the extremely expensive consequences of it. We're about to see a massive spike in the onset of diabetes, for which obesity is a risk factor. The costs of treating obesity are also huge. The medical costs in the US alone range about $100 billion a year. There are also costs that are borne by employers. And I often find this interesting when one of the things that we try to do as behavioral psychologists is to convince employers that they should let us work with their employees during work hours to try to produce healthy behavior change. And the employers say, oh, no, that would hurt the bottom line. It would mar productivity. And I just have to bang my head against the wall because they were already paying those costs. They're paying the costs in terms of employee-related loss in productivity, in terms of absenteeism, in terms of this phenomenon called presenteeism, or sort of dead at your desk. You're there, but you're sort of not there. So these costs are actually being borne not only through the medical sector, but through the work sector as well. There are available solutions to this problem, and one that is particularly effective, actually the head of NIH, who's a geneticist, is now strongly advocating for this solution, is a program that's called the Diabetes Prevention Program. It's an intensive lifestyle intervention. It's nothing particularly magical about it. It's 16 sessions of either individual or group treatment, in which the goal is to promote about a 7% loss in weight by having people reduce their calorie intake and increase their physical activity to about between 150 and 175 minutes a week. This is called the Diabetes Prevention Program, in part because it was initially tried with people who already had high blood glucose. They were pre-diabetic. And it was possible to show that by producing the 7% weight loss, they were able to delay the onset of diabetes, and it was more cost effective than the major drug that's used to treat prediabetes, metformin. So extremely effective. You'd have to, you look at the evidence about this and you'd say, why can't you find this? Could you go to your doc and get referred to DPP treatment? You can't at the moment. Medicare is actually considering whether you should be able to right now, so that may change. But until now, you've just not been able to find this treatment program anyplace. And so the question has been why? We try to have evidence-based health care, but here we have an evidence-based treatment that's obviously really effective. Why can't you find it anyplace? Well, some of the pushback has been, look, it's 16 sessions with a professional, face-to-face sessions. That is just too expensive to pay for the professional labor, and it's too burdensome. it just seems wrong. We're not going to go there. So you're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place, because there have been many trials now to try to say, okay, 16 sessions with a professional may be too much. How about if we cut it in half? How about if we reduce the number, maybe make it 8 sessions? But what happens is you lose the benefit. And this has been replicated many times. The study that's cited here is a recent one, actually, from the Netherlands, in which they cut it to 5 sessions. They lost the effect. So something about that treatment intensity is important. So the intervention development challenge, from my perspective, was, okay, can we find a way to reconfigure this treatment in such a way that we really can cut it to 6 sessions, but take the ingredients that are doing the work and redistribute them, present some of them through technology, do other things with them, so that we can cut the cost but keep the effect. So that was the challenge that the project I'm going to describe was working to achieve. So one of the things that we turned to was some technology to help us. So why technology? Well, technology is it's a fabulous tool, and it's been evolving, and it's even more fabulous now than it was when I was in graduate school. When I was in graduate school, as you can see here, these black wiry things over on the left, I was a psychology graduate student, and the people that got the real respect as scientists were the people who worked in the animal labs, because they had computer-driven experiments that looked like those things over there on the left, with wires that plugged in and so forth. Well, fast forward a few years, and we got computers. And when I was in graduate school, the computers looked like these blue things in the middle. How many of you have ever seen computers like that took punch cards? Okay, some of you. Okay. Well, to get a sense of the evolution of this technology, that blue thing, that was what it took to get 20 gigabytes of memory. And that thing cost more than $1 million, about 1.1 million, and it weighed 4,400 pounds. Now, look at the small black thing. This thing has not 20 gig, but 32 gig, and it costs about $125, and it weighs about 1,000th of a pound. So clearly, major, in this 30-year period, major changes in technology. So what's going on? Well, this is the phenomenon that's been called Moore's Law. Probably you're all familiar with this. Moore was one of the co-founders of Intel, who made the observation that every couple of years, the number of transistors that you can fit easily on an integrated circuit doubles. With the result that we now have the ability to have this kind of miniaturization, and nobody sees evidence that this is going to slow down. So you remember that thing on the left I call the brick phone? The reception was really awful, and they were not exactly easy to carry around, and the technology has gotten smaller and smaller to the point that you now have your little tiny smartphone, and there's probably going to continue. So we can debate whether this is a good or a bad thing. Here you see this is the law of the conservation of mass. As the TV shrinks, the mass jumps onto the person. And we see the evolution of our health behaviors as a result of some of these technological benefits. But it's here. That's not going to go away. So when I decided to start working with technology, I moved into this space where I looked at what was being done in terms of technology-supported interventions. Now, bear in mind, I am a psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist. The only thing we know how to do is treat people in 50-minute hours. You have to come and sit down in my office, and I talk to you for half an hour or for 50 minutes, and then you go away, I write up my notes, and you come back next week. That's what our basic behavior change protocol is like. So the question was, could we do better than that? Is is there a way that we could reconfigure that? We were familiar in terms of the behavior change arena with using technology to measure outcomes. We measure weight on a scale, we measure physical activity by attaching accelerometers to you that measure your movements. We use technology to measure outcomes, but this was a different animal. This was, could we actually use technology to actually help deliver the intervention? And there are a couple of ways that technology is used. There are a lot of different channels that are being used. Telephone was the earliest one, so people weren't doing their 90-minute hour face-to-face. They were doing it over the telephone. Then they were doing it over the internet. And now, increasingly, you're starting to see text-based interventions where they're doing it over mobile devices. Now, what are they conveying over those channels? A bunch of different things. In part, they're providing information. In part, they're providing tools that help people make decisions, so we call that decision support. And they may be providing those things to either the interventionist, to help the interventionist make decisions, or directly to the patient, directly to the consumer. And why are they conveying those things? It's because these are the things that we know work in terms of interventions. Information, problem-solving help, feedback, and social support is another one. So basically, we began to think about using technology as a channel to deliver some of those things that we would otherwise be delivering face-to-face in the therapist's office. And these technologies have varied in the degree to which they completely aim to supplant the therapist. So there are some interventions now where you call up and you talk to an automated telephone system that asks you questions and responds, and there's no human involved, to interventions that engage the human interventionist, which is what we have tended to use, and the efficacy data are far better, showing that things work if you keep the human interventionist somehow involved in the system. So why bother with technological interventions? For all of these reasons. The main thing is that it increases our ability to reach people who have health problems. So if I'm trying to do my usual MO, where I'm sitting in my office waiting for somebody to come see me for 50 minutes, I can't see an awful lot of people. No matter how, and it's too expensive to proliferate people like me, so that's just not a very good option. So part of the idea is to be able to push out intervention to more people. Part of it is to reduce the barriers that people have getting to intervention. So if they have to drive to somebody's office, they have to park, they have to pay for parking, it takes some time, they can't do it when they're available, they have to do it on your schedule. So it's a way of overcoming barriers. Another key piece of it is something that we know as obesity interventionists, or I also do smoking cessation treatment, all these sort of health behavior change things, is that our treatments work best when we deliver them as they were intended. This is called treatment fidelity. The farther you depart from the treatment as it was prescribed, the worse your outcomes tend to be. When you train people to deliver a health intervention and you send them out into the field, they start getting creative and they start reinventing the intervention. They learn things and they think this will help. Unfortunately, it usually doesn't, and usually the fidelity disappears, and so do the results. So this is a way, if you're pushing things out through technology, it's a way of keeping the intervention sort of stable. It's also a way of providing people with support in the moment when they need it. It's a way of lowering the cost of intervention development, and it's a way of scaling. You don't have to proliferate therapists, you can proliferate the technology and scale it that way. But there's an issue about digital divide. There's an issue about equity. And this is something that troubles a lot of us. We have a public health mission. We care about reaching the underserved. And so one of the concerns is always, look, if you're building technology-based interventions, you're building them for the rich people that have these technologies. And this has really been a concern. So what you're seeing on this graph is the blue line is the number of internet users per 100 inhabitants in the developed world. The red is in the developing world, and the green is the combination. So you can see that the curves are parallel, and clearly the developed world has an edge in terms of having more computers per 100 people. What you're seeing here is the same information for mobile phone subscribers. And you can see that basically the shape of the curves is parallel, but there's something you can't see that's very important. And that is that where the developing world is ending up at the end of this period, at the end of, this is 2007, is with 45% usage of smartphones. 40%, because the scales are different, is here on this graph. So although we keep talking about a digital divide, there's really a fair amount of evidence that things look really different when you're talking about mobile technologies like smartphones compared to when you're talking about sort of desktop internet computers. And actually here, I love these data. These just came from a recent Pew Charitable Trust, a research institute survey. They almost hint at a reverse digital divide. So here are data from white non-Hispanics, black non-Hispanics, and Hispanics. On the dark blue is the proportion that have a smartphone. Light blue is the proportion that have another cell phone. And gray is they have no cell phone. Look at the numbers for who has no cell phone. They're actually greatest among the white non-Hispanic. So it really, if you look at smartphone use compared to internet desktop computers, it's looking like, you know, we may not need to be worried about a digital divide here. This may actually be a good way to reach the underserved. But still, we were a little bit worried about this, so we did an initial trial. And one of the populations, I mean, young minorities may be buying technology, but you know, what about the older folks in an older generation? That may be really a group where technology is sort of not making it out there. So when we did this trial, this was the first technology-supported intervention that we did in obesity. And we were using Palm Pilots at the time. Most people don't even remember what a Palm Pilot is anymore. But in our initial focus groups, we did this study with veterans, and we went out and we interviewed lots of veterans about what was their familiarity with Palm Pilots and so forth. We found only one person who had any familiarity with the Palm Pilot. This was a paranoid schizophrenic gentleman who had found one in a dumpster and was using it. Nobody else had encountered one, but we did this trial with obese veterans, 89% male, average age 59, 60. And what was happening here was that these folks were all being treated in a group obesity treatment program that the VA offers, both the control group and the experimental group. But the experimental group, we gave our Palm Pilot decision support tool. Again, remember, nobody had experience with this. And what you see is this is the amount of weight loss. We tripled it in this population. So the control group that was getting group obesity treatment lost about 3 pounds. The group that was getting this handheld decision support tool lost 10 pounds. So that encouraged us that even in a population that was fairly unfamiliar with technology, we were able to do something good. This is the kind of technology we were using back then. You remember the old Palm Pilots with the sort of green screen that would hot sync like that? You'd put it in the cradle, you'd have to attach it to your desktop, and then it would upload the data. And the way this would work is that people would enter in what they were eating, and they would enter in their physical activity, and it would convert the information into displays on these thermometers. So this was somebody who was supposed to be eating 5 fruits and vegetables a day. It helped them keep track by knowing that they had only eaten 2. They had 3 more to go. That they needed 60 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity. They'd only gotten 15 minutes. So just basically a way to keep track. It was a nightmare in terms of the tech support for this. An absolute nightmare because everybody had a different desktop computer. So we actually had to make house calls often to help people with their tech support issues. But we learned that the most important person in the study was the tech support person. We had to train our tech support people to have good bedside manner in addition to good software programming skills, because what you wanted was a situation where when somebody was stuck, they could call you and say, what's going on? And they could be helped through it. And I honestly think this is a great part of the reason why our results were as good as they were, because the tech support was somebody you wanted to talk to. So fast forward, yeah.
Did you test that by just having somebody that people could call?
This is a really great question, and actually the design we're working on right now is we're actually using an engineering design to try to optimize an obesity intervention, and those are some of the kinds of things we're trying to dismantle. So here's where we are now in terms of the study that we have in the field that Liz is helping with. We got funding on the Stimulus Fund Act, on the ARA funds, to see if we could come up with this version of a DPP that would be only 8 sessions. And we varied whether people were doing their recording of diet and activity in the standard way, writing it down on paper and pencil, or whether they were using a handheld device, now a smartphone, that gave them real-time feedback on their diet and activity, and that also gives them some social networking functions. So everybody in the study is getting the same group obesity treatment sessions. They're uploading their data. They're being coached by a bachelor level coach, and they're being given incentives for weight loss as a team, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So what's our model for how we think things are working? Essentially what we want is this outcome of weight loss. How do we think you get it? Again, no mystery to energy balance. You keep to your calorie goals, you keep to your physical activity goals, and what we know about what helps you do that is you have to keep track. You have to self-monitor. It doesn't happen by magic. So the thing we're targeting in this intervention is trying to help people be adherents to self-monitoring, which is not an awful lot of fun. So it's one of the reasons why the design aspects of it are really, really important. Here's our theory about what you need to do to be able to be adherent to diet and physical activity. This is a classic psychological theory called controlled systems theory, comes from engineering. The premise is that in order to be able to self-regulate your behavior, the key thing is you have to be able to detect the discrepancy between where you are now and what your goal is. So they depict this by showing you've got a goal, you've got your behavior where you are now, you have to be able to compare them, and if they're discrepant, you'll be motivated to change your behavior to reduce them, to reduce the discrepancy. So if you think about a model like, okay, you got a flat tire, you want to change, you need to fix the flat tire. There, you've got a goal, you have a clear image of what the tire will look like when it's full of air. You have what the tire looks like now, and you can see the discrepancy. Now how about if we translate this to eating? Your goal is to eat a 500-calorie lunch. Discrepant, not discrepant. How many people think it's discrepant? Most of you, okay. Actually, the surprising thing is, if you didn't have the fries, it wouldn't be that bad. But I show this to illustrate the point that it's a lot harder to know whether your food is mapping onto your calorie goals than it is to know whether your tire is full of air or not. These things don't come labeled. How they're prepared makes a whole lot of difference. Unless you're eating prepackaged foods that you're getting from a Nutrisystem or a Jenny Craig or liquid shakes or something like that, nothing comes labeled. You've got tough decisions to make. So we built a system to help people make these decisions. And this is how it looked to the engineers. So basically what's happening is people are entering in what they're eating onto a smartphone, And the data are being uploaded to the cloud, where they are being analyzed in comparison to the Calorie King nutrient database, which has about 50,000 food items. The information is coming back to their droid and being displayed. And the same thing is happening with an accelerometer that they're wearing called a shimmer. You may notice that we had an accelerometer in the last study, but the problem was accelerometers, until very recently, you had to wear them, come into the lab and download them. They couldn't tell you what your activity was. This thing, for the first time, Bluetooths to the phone. So now we can have you tracking your physical activity based on something real. Because the problem otherwise is you're asking people who are couch potatoes to tell you how many minutes of moderate, vigorous intensity physical activity they've had. We know that 46% of the US population says they get 30 minutes a day. You put an accelerometer on them, you want to guess what the percent is? You're even worse than it is. It's 3.8%. So, that's the core problem. You're a couch potato, you don't know what this feels like. So you need some objective decision support. So, and here is where I started to learn about the kinds of things that you do. This was a very foreign world to me. I worked with a gentleman named Tom McTavish, who used to work at Motorola cell phones. He was referred to me through Donald Norman. And this is what he taught us to do. So he said, look, the first thing you have to do is you've got to learn something about people's eating habits and their needs and how they will actually use this kind of device in their real environment. So he went around with his students and went into people's homes and who were trying to lose weight, and he looked at how they related to food and physical activity. And he noticed things like, this is a woman's home that he went into, and the woman was saying, I never buy cookies. I don't even like them, really. But in the trash are Teddy Grahams. Likewise, she's saying, I really like vegetables. I eat a lot of them. I eat them with most every meal. But there are no vegetables in the house. And so the point was that some of the things that people think they are doing seem not to be what they're doing. So there's an awareness issue. So one of the design principles that he took away was, one of the things we need to do is to make the invisible visible. Another one was that we need to make self-regulation intuitive. And I like to show this graph because, this figure, because it's embarrassing. This was our design, you'll remember, for our first study, the thermometers. So this was the thermometer for getting enough physical activity. This is the thermometer for how many calories you can have. So look what's happening here. Your intuition is you want to get this physical activity, so you want to push the thermometer up to reach the top of the bar. It's like hitting the thing at the fairground that raises the needle on the thermometer. But now look what happens when you're managing calories. Your instinct is the same thing. Do it in parallel. And that's exactly the wrong thing to do. You don't want to achieve more. Now you have to cut down. So this made us realize, this was the stupidest design you could have had. You had people working at cross purposes with each other. So we realized, okay, we need to use another device besides a thermometer for one of these things. So we shifted to using a dial, and we shifted to using a color scheme that people are familiar with, traffic light, where green is good, yellow is danger, red is, you're doing something wrong. And this is what our current smartphone looks like. So what you see is that people in this protocol have to keep track of their calories and their fat grams. And so here's somebody who is still in a green zone. They've got plenty of calorie allowance left. They're getting a little close on their fat grams. Here's somebody who's exceeded their calorie allowance and fat grams. That's really aversive. Some people have dropped the phone when they see the thing go all red like that. It's pretty potent. And here's the other thing. See, we kept the thermometer for physical activity, and now we have people wearing this accelerometer, which is Bluetoothing to the phone. And we learned something else about the design of this piece of the apparatus. People like the feedback from the device about how much activity they're getting, but they don't want to be completely at its mercy. They don't want to be told by it. They feel that they know better. So, and sometimes that's legitimate if they forgot to put it on or if they were swimming, something like that. So we let them tell the device. But you'll notice the difference between the darker green and the lighter green. We give them credit for the lighter green, but we would prefer if they were wearing the device. So that's how we accommodated that bit. Some things about how to organize the foods. How do you do it? Is it food groups, nutrient groups? We learned that people organize their foods by how frequently they eat them. So we added a tab that incorporates that information. And here was one of the most interesting parts to us about social support. We know that social support is something that helps with weight loss, but we all also live in the modern era and we watch The Biggest Loser. So we thought, okay, team competition, that's the way to do this. So we were going to incentivize the different groups that we treat to be in a competition to see which group would lose the most weight. And this was our initial mock-up for how we were going to do this. Each team has a little icon, and they're competing. Who's lost the most weight? Which team has lost the most weight? So that's what we were designing. And then we went and we talked to the people that we would be trying to help. And we heard them say things like, look, I'd do a 5K walk for charity, but I don't care about winning a race or winning a game of tennis. It's not me. I'll do it to help somebody. So this told us, oof, we were playing this motivation wrong. We had to motivate people for community engagement and to help other people. So we completely shifted the idea and we decided, okay, what we want to be able to do is empower folks to send encouragement to other folks. And part of the reason that I really wanted to do this study, my image was I wanted to have people sending their friends broccoli bouquets as bits of encouragement. But what I learned, because this is team science, is if you really want to implement these ideas, they've got to be feasible. And my design engineer said, no way, you just can't do it. So here is how we worked. And this was I've done interdisciplinary projects before, but this was really a breakthrough for me in terms of understanding the value of a team science approach. Here you see some of the key members of our team. And so here we've got a nutritionist, we have the data manager, we have folks from the IIT design school, we have a couple of psychologists, we have a public health specialist, and we have these two guys who were fantastic. This is Tom McTavish, who's the design person from Motorola. And this is Hal Snyder, who was our engineer, who now works, he's the lead systems designer for Orbitz, the travel agency. So they're extremely talented, very interested in the problem, worked way more than we could possibly have afforded to pay them, and just taught us a ton. But it was not easy to communicate. This is the kind of language that makes perfect sense to Hal, our engineer. I don't understand what that means. So this was some of the sets of challenges we had to work through. Here is how we designed the social support aspect of the intervention. So we gave them a sort of a Facebook app where they could communicate with each other and give support. And then one of the really interesting questions was we wanted to incentivize them as groups by now not to have the groups competing with each other, but to motivate them to care about each other. So the question is, how do you want their support of each other to be informed? How can you make it helpful support? Our formative work told us nobody wants their weight or their weight gain or weight loss circulating around in cyberspace. No way. Yet we wanted folks to know something about how their teammates were doing so they could prod them when necessary, reinforce them when appropriate, and so forth. So what we came up with was these 3 icons. Every team member is represented by these 3 icons. They have a flag they can put up. Green flag means everything's going great. Red flag means they need help. Then these 2 show whether they're self-monitoring. So this is, the flag starts out red before they've entered any of their food. It goes yellow when they've entered a few food items. It goes green when they've entered 3 meals for the day. Same thing in terms of accelerometer wear. So this also, the changes in the colors, is also something that people found reinforcing. I'm just going to show you data from a very small proof of concept pilot to give you a sense the sort of reactions people had to this system. So this was just 6 participants. They didn't get any coaching. They just had the technology. And they ranged in terms of their familiarity with technology. These were some of the kinds of things that traveled on the message board. People shared their successes. They supported each other. They got into the metaphor of the app. Happy birthday, Hal. May you eat well, but stay within the fan meter safe zone. And some, again, starting to show the relationship to the app. Happy that I got a green 3 today, referring to the 3 flags. Gail, okay, I'm in for the 3-peat flag feet. So you would get teams that would be having a goal of trying to get that whole team, the whole team icon page green. So kind of interesting. Again, small sample, but what you'll see, we looked we wanted to make sure that people were not losing weight too fast. That's always something you worry about in weight loss studies. If they're losing too rapidly, that can be risky. Everybody's at a safe rate of weight loss. You'll notice that people use the system for various periods of time. We had a couple who used it for almost a full year. That's these 2 who lost a substantial amount of weight, 23 and 16 pounds. This is subject 4, subject 5. Keep an eye on those folks, and also on 6, who only lost 3 pounds and gave it up after a couple of months. So the 2 successes, 4 and 5, and the not so success, 6. These are the days that these folks logged in a food record, and what you see, 4 and 5 logging in pretty much most days of the week, 4 to 6 or 7. This person who didn't lose much weight, not logging in very much at all. Self-monitoring is one of those things that we know is related to weight loss. Here's their chats, how much they're relating to their support group. Very high for 4 and 5. They really bonded with this community. 6 sent no chats, didn't connect at all. So this little pilot suggested to us that, this is a system that looks like it's got some promise for some people. For some other people, it looks like it's not the system for them. What did the woman say who had difficulty with it, who didn't lose much weight and left after a couple of weeks? Well, she felt burdened by the system. It was a responsibility. She was worried about the security of it, and she was afraid of failing. She felt sort of like a loser because she couldn't master the smartphone very well. And she found it stressful to do this recording. So some qualitative feedback that tells us who this is good for and who it's not so good for. So where are we now? Our trial with this system is in the field. We're treating and testing 100 people. And what we're trying to do, basically, is to remove the access barriers to this kind of treatment, to be able to bring obesity treatment into the person's own environment. They don't have to come to us. We're bringing the treatment to them. And we're trying to leverage the social network to help them make these behavior changes and help them stick, because long after we're gone, the social network is still going to be there. We're using a financial incentive, but we're not using it to stimulate competition. We're using it to try to motivate caring about your team members. And we're trying to see if we can give people tools to help make this kind of self-regulation that they need to do a little bit easier. This is actually a slide that I presented at a recent conference, a joint conference put on by National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, McKesson Foundation, and Robert Wood Johnson. I was very excited by this conference because it was an effort to bring together the different disciplines that we know need to be brought together to improve mobile health applications. And the topic was, what kind of evidence do we need to be sure that we're on the right track with well-designed mobile health apps? And this is really kind of key because you hear, I would never do a trial with less than 100 people. 10, 8, 10 is pretty normative in the kind of design work I was just describing. So these are some of the differences in cultures about what's adequate evidence. So this was really sort of a fun meeting. And I show this because this is one of the things that I learned from Tom McTavish about the need to learn about not only expressed needs but unexpressed ones. This is a guy who wanted to use his smartphone in the bathtub. So he invented a workaround, the nose guy that. So, and in terms of digital disparities, I think that's not nearly as much of an issue, particularly using mobile devices, as we'd worried about. And I think it may be because people perceive the utility of some of these mobile devices, and that's enough to motivate them to overcome the barriers. And some of the social motives are very high on that list. And really, being able to use these kind of novel intervention channels and have things that are designed so that they're persuasive and sticky is actually a way that we may be able to overcome some of the inequalities and push out helpful health interventions more easily. But we really, boy, do we need your help in terms of design, because this is not anything we know about. And it sure looks like it makes a difference, and so I'm really pleased by your interest, and I want to say thank you from my team in downtown Chicago. So thank you.